Today we have the 2.7 liter turbo high output engine from GM, and I can't wait to get into it and give you guys my opinion as a heavy duty licensed technician. Well, this is the GMC Sierra and we have a red truck. First time on the channel, I believe. I do have to say the front ends on the GMs just look so much better than the Chevys. Just my personal opinion, but I feel like it's shared. Yeah, no, nice little red truck. I mean, the 2.7 liter turbo, which is in this truck, is a base model engine, which means you don't get anything here. It's just a blank plaque. It would have been nice for GM to do something, maybe put 2.7 liter turbo on there or something like that, but it is what it is. Not a bad looking truck. I do have to say though, I always feel like the Chevys and obviously the GMC Sierras, they feel lower than the F-150s and the Ram 1500s. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but you know, a short guy like me can easily get into the bed here, where with those other trucks, I just feel like they're taller. Classic bumper step here, and she is a 4x4, as basically every single pickup truck is these days. But yeah, no, not a bad looking truck. And most importantly, what we're dealing with today is what's under the hood. So I'm gonna finish my coffee and we'll get down to the nitty gritty. What is going on today, guys? My name's Alex. Welcome back to the channel. Like I mentioned a couple times, we have this interesting 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, which is now the base model in your GMC 1500 or your Chevy 1500s. First off, I figure we talk about some specs, talk about some things I like about this engine, and then finally get down to where the rubber meets the road, talk about some issues or some common issues with the engine and some concerns that I have if you guys are looking at buying one of these things. So that's what we're doing today. Should be fun. I can't wait. I'll start this thing up because it's got an interesting sound to it, as you guys probably can imagine. So definitely not that V8 grunt that you usually hear in a pickup truck, but you can hear that turbo spool up, which is kind of cool. I want to thank the official apparel sponsor of the channel, Old North Co. They are a local London, Ontario company founded by two sisters. They have a great selection of outdoor Canadian designs in t-shirts, sweaters, hats. They even have cool stuff for your dogs. If you guys are interested, put a 10% discount code down below, so check them out. This 2.7 liter turbocharged inline 4 engine made its debut in 2019, producing 310 horsepower as well as just around 350 pound-feet of torque, which is kind of impressive. Now, in 2022, GM released the high output version of this 2.7 liter turbocharged engine, and now you get 310 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque out of this thing, which I have to say is pretty impressive. That torque figure is greater than the 5.7 liter HEMI, the 5 liter Ford engine, as well as GM's own 5.3 liter engine, all of which are V8s. So it is kind of impressive you can get that much power out of this small package. Not only are those power numbers impressive for a 4-cylinder power plant, but this thing can tow up to 9,600 pounds, just under 10,000 pounds of towing capacity out of this power plant, as well as getting 23 miles per gallon on the highway and going 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds. So this thing does pack a little bit of a punch for being in such a small package. However, there is a lot to unpack because there is a lot of technology in this turbocharged engine to make that all happen. In terms of engine strength, in 2022, GM strengthened the crankshaft in this thing by 30%. They also added some strength to the aluminum engine block by adding an extra kilogram of aluminum to it. The bottom end on this engine is completely forged to deal with those high pressures from this engine being turbocharged. So there is some good strength in this engine right to begin with. There is so much technology in this engine, I don't really even know where to start. It's gonna make for a longer video, but we gotta start somewhere. So There is a dual volute turbocharger in here, which is going to help maximize low-end boost and limit turbo lag. This engine is going to have direct injection. It's got ECU controlled variable valve timing. There is dual overhead electromagnetic 3-phase sliding camshafts to allow this engine to operate with 3 different cam profiles. This thing has the notorious active fuel management as well, even though it's a 4-cylinder, which we'll get into. This thing has thermal management, special cooling techniques and technology that will, heat certain parts of the engine and cool certain parts of the engine depending on load. This thing has a variable displacement oil pump, GM's first electric water pump in here, start-stop technology, and a lot more. So one of the first things that I like about this engine is something that's not really going to jump off the spec sheet at you, and it is that this thing has an impressively long stroke. Now, this thing has a stroke of 4.01 inches, and to put that into perspective, that is a longer stroke than the 6.6 liter Duramax. So it does have a pretty long stroke, and I always seem to be talking about this, but when it comes to pickup trucks, having a long stroke in your engine just allows your engine to produce torque very well, very naturally. And it just gives the engine a mechanical advantage of producing torque down low in the RPMs, which is exactly what GM wanted with this engine. And I think it really solidifies that GM made this engine for their pickup trucks. If we look at an engine like the 6.7 Cummins, it only has 6 cylinders, but it has a massive stroke, almost 5 inches. And that allows it to just produce torque extremely well, and that's why it's such a torque monster and does so well when towing and pulling things. Similar to this engine, it has less cylinders, so when you give it a large stroke, it's really going to help it out when it comes to towing or pulling. And it's no surprise that this engine will reach 90% of its peak torque by 1500 RPM, which is kind of unheard of for a gas turbocharged engine. Another interesting feature about this engine is the fact that GM included their active fuel management or their cylinder deactivation on this 4-cylinder engine, meaning that this 4-cylinder engine will actually run on 2 cylinders. So cylinder 1 and 4 will continue to run, and the 2 center ones, 2 and 3, will actually become dead cylinders, which to me is a little odd, but I guess in today's age, every drop of fuel saved does matter. Another interesting piece of technology on this engine is this 3-phase sliding camshaft. Obviously, this is a first for GM, and to be honest, I've actually never heard of this type of technology, so it is kind of interesting. Now, I imagine many of you guys have heard of Honda's famous VTEC technology, and this is kind of similar to that. Basically, you have a low lift valve position, and that's for fuel efficiency, just normal driving. Then you have what's called a high lift position, and that's when the cam slides over to a more aggressive cam lobe profile. Basically, the lobes are larger, and that's going to force the valves open further, and you're going to get more airflow shoved into that cylinder, and you're going to make more power. The third cam phase is the active fuel management, and that is what's going to shut down 2 of your 4 cylinders. So that's why they call it a 3-phase sliding camshaft. This engine will also be utilizing direct injection, and that does seem like it's kind of a staple for all of GM's pickup truck engines at this point. The 5.3, the 6.2, as well as the 6.6 L8T, which I reviewed 2 weeks ago. They're all direct injection, and this one is no different. Now, with direct injection, you're gonna be able to make more power, higher compression ratios, better throttle response, and be able to run the engine a little bit more efficiently. However, with direct injection, there are some drawbacks, which we will get into later. Now, lastly, in terms of technology I found interesting was the dual volute turbocharger. Now, basically what that means, there's 2 channel ways for exhaust gases to go into the turbo. So 2 cylinders control one and 2 cylinders control the other. Engineering Explain on YouTube does a really good job explaining how that turbo works, as well as actually explaining how the 3-phase camshaft works. So if you guys are more interested in that, I'll link his video down below. But basically with this dual volute turbo, it's gonna help maximize low-end torque and minimize boost, which is basically what you want out of a pickup truck when you're looking to tow. So it is some pretty interesting tech, and it is cool that GM has really done their homework and thrown some really cool innovative technology into this engine. So I've already talked briefly about one thing I really like, the long stroke. The second thing I like about this engine is the fact that they put this engine in longitudinally. Now, that may seem pretty obvious with a pickup truck, but with Inline 4 engines in basically every vehicle, they are going to be horizontally mounted. So I really like that GM put this engine in a proper position longitudinally, and it just makes all the plumbing around this engine very easy to handle, especially with the turbocharger. You have your exhaust side over here as well as your turbocharger. Your charged air comes through the charged air cooler and then goes into over your intake. It just makes things really, really simple, and I like that GM did this. Now this is a completely different engine. It's a massive 15-liter engine, but on these million-mile big boys, they have the exact same turbo plumbing setup. Exhaust side on the passenger side, turbo air comes through into the charged air cooler. Once the air is cooled to the charged air cooler, it comes into your intake, and this is your intake side on the driver's side. This makes it look much more simple, but on that truck, it is basically the same thing, just a little bit smaller, obviously. Now, the third thing that I really like about this truck and this engine is the responsiveness. So normally when you hear turbocharged, especially on a gas engine, you think of turbo lag. It is kind of impressive how GM has honed this turbo and this engine into basically making almost zero turbo lag. This engine is very, very responsive, and I was impressed driving this thing home and then obviously driving it back to the shop. And it is very impressive that this thing will make 90% of its peak torque by 1500 RPM. Usually with a gas turbocharged engine, peak torque is like north of like 4,000 RPM. So this thing is quite a responsive engine despite being turbocharged. So like I always say, no engine is perfect, and it's time to get our hands dirty in some common issues with this engine, as well as some things that generally concern me. So the first common issue on these engines is lifter failures, mostly associated with the notorious active fuel management technology from GM. And to me, that's no surprise because every engine in the pickup trucks is suffering from the same thing. Basically, the 5.3s, the 6.2s are all suffering from active fuel management technology, especially the fact that this camshaft is so special with this engine, and when those lifters fail, it takes out the camshaft, so it is a pretty catastrophic failure. So that is one thing to be aware of. Now, I'm pretty sure you can get some tuning technology that will actually disable the active fuel management technology, which I would highly recommend on this engine. Now, another common issue on this engine is carbon buildup, and I talked about that 2 weeks ago when I did my review on the 6.6 liter L8T V8. The reason that both those engines have carbon buildup is because they are both direct injection. Now, carbon buildup can happen in your intake as well as your intake valve, and this is going to result in a restriction of airflow, which can potentially lead to loss of power, rough idling, and even misfires. And the reason why that happens is because, well, with direct injection, your injector nozzle, your injector needle is actually in the combustion chamber, and that's where it sprays fuel. With a more traditional port injection engine, that fuel is sprayed into the intake, and that fuel just naturally cleans away all the carbon and you don't get any carbon deposits. But obviously with direct injection, you're not getting fuel dumped into your intake. And so that is what causes the carbon buildup. And there unfortunately really isn't anything that you can do other than actually manually clean it out. And reports are that this engine is experiencing pretty significant carbon buildup, anywhere from like 60 to like 80,000 miles. So basically right as she runs out of warranty, more or less. Now, another common issue directly related to direct injection is having fuel injectors fail. So again, your fuel injector tip is actually right in the combustion chamber. So it is going to be faced with a lot of heat and a lot of pressure, and that can cause carbon buildup on the tip itself or actually cause the tip to fail. And it's not like this is a quote unquote common issue, like it's an actual real problem, but you are going to experience injector failures much more common than you would with a traditional port style injection engine. So that is something to be aware of with these direct injection engines. Now, the last common issue when it comes to having a direct injection fuel system is the high pressure pump failing. And again, it's not like these pumps are failing left, right, and center, but it is something to be aware of because a traditional fuel system does not have a high pressure pump to worry about. And if you plan on keeping this engine or any engine with direct injection over a long period of time, odds are you're gonna have to eventually put a pump in it, because I don't think they're supposed to last much longer than like 100,000 miles. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I read. So if you guys plan on having this engine long term, you are going to have to do quite a bit of maintenance to the fuel system, probably throw a set of injectors in, probably a fuel pump, and probably some carbon cleanout of your intake versus a traditional fuel system where you probably don't have to worry too much about any of that. The other thing I heard rumblings of is potential turbo issues. Now, with a turbo, I consider a turbo a wearable item. So if you guys, again, plan on keeping this engine for a long time, odds are you'll probably end up replacing the turbo at some point in the life of the engine because there's a lot of heat, there's a lot of pressure that goes through it, and at the end of the day, like I said, I consider it a wearable item. So it's just, again, something to be aware of when you're buying this engine, that if you want to keep it long term, you'll probably end up replacing the turbo as well as some of those fuel components like I mentioned. So those are the issues that I came across with this engine. And this engine is still relatively new, so it does give GM quite a bit of time to, tweak with it and hopefully, try and fix some of those things. Now, finally, guys, some things that I don't like and then some things that concern me. So starting off with things I don't like, kind of talk about the elephant in the room. It's the fuel economy with this engine, and it is really not as good as you would hope to expect. So in my humble opinion, I feel like the only reason why GM went with such a small engine is for fuel economy. And if that wasn't the case, why didn't they just go with like a 3.5 liter inline six twin turbo or single turbo setup and make some really big power numbers with all this technology? But I think the main reason is to increase fuel economy. So for a 4x4 truck, which I feel like 95% of you guys will be buying, you get 18 miles per gallon city, 21 miles per gallon highway, and a combined fuel mileage of 19 miles per gallon. So do you know what else, or what other engine gets 19 miles per gallon combined? The 5.7 liter HEMI in the Ram 1500s. In fact, GM's own 5.3 liter V8 gets better highway fuel mileage than this thing. And to me, that is a little outrageous. Furthermore, apparently there is a class action lawsuit pending against GM for potentially falsifying efficiency numbers on this engine because apparently customers are not getting anywhere close to what GM says this engine should be getting. So that is also a little bit of a concern. So for me right now, I'm getting 13.5 liters per 100 kilometers. We'll put the miles down below there. Now that is probably a really true 50-50 split between city and highway driving. And that's not bad, 13.5 liters per 100K in a pickup truck. That's nothing to complain about. But again, do you know what other truck got 13.5 liters per 100 kilometers very consistently? My 2017 Ram 1500 with the 5.7 HEMI in it. Now, my final point about fuel economy is that they recommend you run 91 octane in this engine, and I don't disagree with them because this is a turbocharged engine. Realistically, you probably should be running premium fuel. You can run 87 octane, they say that's not a problem, but in order to get the alleged fuel economy ratings, that was done with premium fuel. So if you're just gonna plan on running regular fuel, you're not gonna see close to those fuel economy numbers that this engine claims. So that is another thing to just be aware of. So yeah, to me, it just seemed like fuel economy was the #1 reason why this engine is so small to begin with, yet the fuel economy numbers are not even that impressive. Bottom line, if you want an impressive GMC 1500 in terms of fuel economy, go buy the 3-liter Duramax. That thing will actually impress you when it comes to fuel economy. The second thing that I really don't like about this engine is the active fuel management technology GM put in here. I don't know why they did it. I mean, this engine should be efficient enough just having 4 cylinders and not needing to cut it down to 2 cylinders. To me, it just doesn't make much sense. And there's 2 reasons why. The first one is because this thing is always going to be under load for the most part when driving a 5,000-pound pickup truck behind it, especially at highway speeds. So it's like, when is this thing actually going to be in 2-cylinder mode? and you know, how much fuel is that actually going to save over, you know, a certain period of time? I would think it's very minimal. And the second thing is GM must know that their active fuel management technology is probably causing a lot of these lifter failures, and not only this engine, but the 5.3 and the 6.2. So it's like, why would they just not put that in and completely avoid that potential issue to save, you know, a tiny amount of fuel, which we've already established this engine is really not that fuel efficient in the first place. So, you know, I don't like that at all, and I don't know why GM, you know, put that in this engine. So the third thing that I generally don't like about this engine is the failure rate. Apparently, this engine has a failure rate right around 4%, a 4% catastrophic failure rate. Now, that may not seem that high, but you would like to see that number right around 1 to 2%. That's a good failure rate for a good engine. So that's about double that. And yes, this engine is relatively new, and as the years go by, GM will have the chance to kind of lower that catastrophic percentage, and hopefully they do. But as of right now, that is a pretty high rate of failure in this engine. And if I was buying a $60,000 plus pickup truck, that would concern me. Now, speaking of things that concern me when it comes to a $60,000 or more pickup truck, is the amount of technology in this actual engine. And like I mentioned earlier, usually simplicity equals reliability, and this thing is very far from simple. At the beginning of the video, I listed off a good chunk of the technology, but just for another example. So this engine is actually one of the biggest displacement inline-4 gasoline engines, and what comes with that is a lot of vibrations, because inline-4 engines are not naturally balanced, and the larger displacement you go, the more they are unbalanced. So what GM had to do is they actually put twin balance shafts underneath the crankshaft, and they spin twice as fast as the crankshaft to help balance out the engine. So again, that's just another example of how this thing is very, very complex of an engine. It concerns me when you look at, you know, longevity, reliability, because this isn't just a simple pushrod V8 like you're gonna get out of the 6.6 liter in the HD trucks. So the fact that there's so much new technology as well, it does concern me if you guys are looking to keep this engine long term. And by no means am I trying to, let's say, bash GM, because I'm actually really, really impressed by them. And they have thrown a lot of really, really cool technology into this, and they've honed it down into a really cool platform and product. So I have to give props to GM, but it's whether or not I would want to buy this engine for my own pickup truck, and if I thought this would last 200,000 miles, and frankly, the answer is probably no. Personally, I would like an engine that is just strong, reliable, durable, tried and true. And you're gonna get that for the most part with the 5.3 liter. It's been around for about 20 years, and it is generally a good engine. This is an unknown, and judging by how much tech is shoved into it, as a mechanic, I just understand that new technology and the more of it usually equals more problems. And that's what I've seen from dealing with real world engines. So that would be my main concern, is the longevity of this engine. Is that 3-phase sliding camshaft going to last 150,000 miles? Is your turbo gonna last 150,000 miles? Or are you gonna have to replace it once, twice? You know, are your lifters gonna last 150,000 miles? But despite my concerns, I'll be putting my mouth where my money is, and I am hoping and planning on towing a max trailer with this thing sometime in the late spring, early summer, once I get that all figured out. So I'm really excited for that, but yeah, that's what I think about this engine. I don't think it's the worst. I just have some concerns, which I think I you know, expressed to you guys very vividly. So in conclusion, guys, I like that GM has really taken a step forward in terms of internal combustion technology in this engine. But I guess the real question is that beneficial for you guys, the end consumer? That is the question. And to me, I would feel much more comfortable just paying an extra $1,500 and getting a 5.3 liter V8, tried and true. But that is just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. I'm always interested, and I like to hear from real owners what you guys have observed with your own trucks. Let me know down below. Hopefully you liked the video, and if you did, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to have you guys on board, and I'm really excited to get towing with these trucks once all this white stuff and all that snow disappears. Anyways, enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.